I was standing at the boarding gate at Will Rogers World Airport in Oklahoma City, carry-on bag in hand, ready to fly to Portland, Oregon for a 4-day wedding industry conference, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my home security app. I opened it, and what I saw on that screen stopped me completely. My parents' red pickup truck was parked in front of my house. My mother was scanning the street. My father was unloading boxes from the truck bed. And my 27-year-old brother Ignatius was walking through my front door, using a key I had given my parents for emergencies only. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from right now. If you have ever had a family member take something from you and expect you to just stay quiet about it, hit that like button because this story is for you. And if you are new here, please subscribe because what happened over the next 6 hours inside my own home is something I am still processing 3 months later. Stay with me because the part where my brother decided to run a live stream about financial wisdom from inside my house, while I was supposed to be 30,000 feet in the air, that part is coming, and it is worth every second of your time. To understand what I did that afternoon, you need to understand what the 5 years leading up to it looked like. Because what happened on that Tuesday in October was not a surprise. It was the end of a very long road that I had been walking alone for a long time, and every step of it had a price tag attached. My name is Callister. I am 31 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house in Edmond, Oklahoma, a house I bought with my own money after 8 years of working without taking a single real vacation. I am a luxury wedding planner, which means I spend my days managing 6-figure budgets, negotiating vendor contracts, and keeping other people's most important days from falling apart. I am good at my job. I am organized, detail-oriented, and I do not miss things. That last part matters a lot to this story. My parents live in Yukon, Oklahoma, about 25 minutes from my house. They are not bad people in the way that some parents are bad people. They did not hit us, they did not abandon us, they kept the lights on and food on the table. But somewhere along the way, they decided that Ignatius, my younger brother by 4 years, was the one who needed protecting, and I was the one who could handle anything. That division became the operating system of our family, and nobody questioned it because it had always been that way. Ignatius is 27 years old. He is charming, he is funny, he knows how to work a room, and he has never held a job longer than 14 months in his life. He had moved out of my parents' house 3 times by the time this story starts, and he had moved back in 3 times. The reason he needed to move out each time was always different. The reason he needed to move back in was always the same: money. The most recent situation was that he and his fiancée Delphine were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Midwest City, and the landlord had notified them that the lease would not be renewed because Ignatius had not paid rent for 2 consecutive months. Delphine worked as a dental hygienist and made a decent living. Ignatius ran a YouTube channel and a social media presence built around the concept of personal finance and wealth building, where he had amassed over 18,000 followers who tuned in regularly to hear him talk about making smart decisions with money. He had not paid his rent for 2 months. I did not know about the apartment situation when I was packing for Portland. I found out later. What I need to tell you about first is the pattern, because the pattern is what makes the rest of this story make sense. The first time I noticed the pattern clearly was 3 years before Portland, at Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. There were 8 of us at the table: my parents, Ignatius and whoever he was dating at the time, 2 cousins, my aunt and me. I had driven over from Edmond, brought 2 pies and a side dish, and was helping clear the table when my mother looked across at my father and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Callister does not need a house that big. She lives alone." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her and asked what she meant by that. She smiled and said, "I am just being practical, honey." Nobody said anything else. Ignatius looked at me from across the table with an expression I had seen before but could not name yet. I put the plates in the sink and drove home. That comment would have been nothing on its own, but it was not on its own. 6 months later, I left $300 in cash in an envelope on my kitchen counter when my parents came over to visit, money I had set aside to pay the lawn service that came every other week. When they left, the envelope was gone. When I asked about it the next time I saw them, my mother said she was sure I must have misplaced it. My father did not say anything. Ignatius had been there that afternoon. I did not have proof, I did not push. 2.5 years before Portland, Ignatius called me at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. He was calm and easy the way he always was, and he told me he needed $2,000 to cover a penalty on a vehicle lease because he had missed a payment and the fee had compounded. He did not say please. He said it the way someone says they need you to pass the salt. I asked why he was not calling our parents. He said they did not have it. I transferred the money that same night. 3 months later, I asked about it and he said, I thought you were giving it to me. My mother was standing right there when he said it and she said, it is family, Callister, let it go. I let it go. 18 months before Portland, my parents organized a family meeting at their house. They did not tell me the topic in advance. I drove over on a Saturday afternoon expecting it to be about my father's health checkup results, which had been a point of concern earlier that year. When I sat down, my father pulled out a legal pad with handwritten notes and explained that the meeting was about Ignatius's future. The word future was underlined twice. My father presented a case. Ignatius had potential that had not been given the right opportunity. Ignatius needed stability. Ignatius was not suited to living with roommates. And I had a 3-bedroom house with 2 rooms that were not being used for anything critical. I said no. I said it clearly and without apologizing. I said I lived alone by choice, that my home was my space and that I was not interested in changing that arrangement. My mother set her fork down and said, I cannot believe how selfish you have become. Are you not embarrassed by that? I drove back to Edmond that evening and did not respond to their texts for 4 days. But the thing that sits the deepest, the thing that was still sitting in my chest when I was standing at that boarding gate, happened 8 months before Portland. My grandmother on my mother's side passed away after a long illness. She was 83, she had lived a full life and her passing was not unexpected. But it hit me harder than I had prepared for because my grandmother and I had a specific ritual. Every Sunday for 10 years, I would go to her house, sit in the green wingback chair she kept next to the window in her living room, and we would talk for 2 hours about anything and everything. That chair was where I told her I had gotten my first big client. That chair was where she told me she was proud of me in a way that nobody else in my family had ever said directly. When she passed, she left me that chair. It was not valuable in any financial sense. It was old and the fabric had worn in places, but it was mine and it meant everything to me. 1 week after the funeral, I went to pick it up from her house and it was not there. My aunt told me my mother had already taken it along with some other items. When I called my mother, she said my grandmother had mentioned at some point that she wanted everyone to have something to remember her by, and that she had decided to keep the chair at her house where the whole family could enjoy it. I asked directly, who gave you permission to take the chair that was specifically left to me? My mother said, we are family, Callister, nothing is just yours. My father did not get on the phone. Ignatius sent me a text that evening that said, she did not mean it like that. I did not respond. That was 8 months before Portland. And every single one of those moments, every dinner comment, every missing envelope, every $2,000 phone call, every family meeting. Every chair I had written down in a spreadsheet that I had started the night Ignatius called me at 11 o'clock, and I transferred money I was never going to see again. I had not planned to use it for anything. I kept records the way I kept records at work, because I do not like uncertainty, and I do not like being caught without documentation. I had no idea at the time how useful that habit was going to turn out to be. When I stood at that boarding gate and watched my family walk through my front door on my security camera, I did not feel surprised. I felt something settle into place instead, the way a lock sounds when the right key finally goes in. I want to tell you what was in that spreadsheet, because it is important, and because I had never let myself look at the total until I opened the laptop at that boarding gate. I started keeping the file in a folder labeled Work Contracts Backup on my personal laptop. I named the actual file Family Transactions Do Not Share. Every time money moved from my account to Ignatius or to my parents on his behalf, I logged it. Date, amount, stated reason, method of payment. I did this the same way I tracked vendor deposits for weddings, factually without emotion, as a record that existed independent of how I felt about it. The first few entries were small, $150 for groceries when Ignatius was between paychecks, $80 to cover a utility bill at his first apartment, $200 for a car repair that he said he would pay back and did not. Each individual number felt manageable. That was the point, I think. Each individual number was small enough that saying no felt petty. Saying yes felt like what a good sister did. By the time I sat down at that gate in Will Rogers World Airport, the file had 47 entries spanning 5 years. The total was $135,000. I sat with that number for a full 90 seconds before I moved. $135,000. I had earned every cent of that money from early morning client calls, from weekend venue walkthroughs, from 3-month planning cycles that took everything I had mentally and physically, from contracts I had negotiated from scratch with no one helping me. And it had left my account in increments small enough that I had never once stopped to add them up. The number was not the only thing in that spreadsheet. I had also kept records of dates, text messages referenced as reasons for requests, and in several cases, screenshots of the transfer confirmations. I had kept those not because I planned litigation. I kept them because documentation is the only thing that survives when memory gets contested. And I had learned that lesson from 8 years of planning weddings, where something always went wrong, and someone always tried to revise history afterward. What my family did not know was that I had not been passive for the past 2 years. After the family meeting about the spare bedroom 18 months earlier, I had scheduled a consultation with a property attorney in Oklahoma City to understand my rights regarding my home, potential unwanted occupancy, and what legal standing I had if someone moved in without my explicit written consent. The attorney gave me a document outlining those rights. I kept that document in the same cloud folder as the spreadsheet. I had also, 9 months earlier, opened a separate savings account at a different bank than my primary account, one that was not linked to any card my parents had ever seen or handled. I had been quietly moving a portion of each paycheck into that account, not as a secret exactly. Nobody had ever asked, and I had not volunteered the information. My family looked at me and saw someone who would eventually go along with things. My mother had said it out loud at my own front door that morning, captured clearly on a camera she did not know existed. She will just accept it. What she did not know was that the woman they were planning to outmaneuver had $135,000 in documented transactions, a property attorney's number saved under contact labeled Florist OKC in her phone, and a secondary financial account they had no knowledge of. They had walked into my house thinking they were moving in. They had no idea what was already waiting for them. I was close to standing up and calling my father directly. I had his number on the screen. I had already decided what I was going to say. Then someone sat down in the empty seat to my left. She was in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, a small grey carry-on at her feet, and she was looking at her phone the way people do when they are trying not to look at anything else. I would not have paid attention to her at all except that she glanced over at my screen. My security camera feed was still open and visible, and she said quietly, "That is the house with the blue front door, is it not? Off Covington Drive." I turned and looked at her. It took me 4 seconds to recognize her outside of the context where I had seen her before. The last time I had seen her in person was at my parents' house in Yukon at Christmas, and before that at the engagement party 7 months earlier. Both times were brief and social. Her name was Delphine, and she was the woman Ignatius was supposed to be marrying. I did not say anything for a moment. I was doing the math quickly, what she was doing at this airport, what gate she was sitting at, and how she knew the address of my house well enough to recognize it from a camera feed. Delphine told me without me having to ask. She said she had been to my house once about 2 months earlier, when she came with Ignatius and my parents during what Ignatius told her was a family visit. He had told her they were stopping by to check on the property while I was at a client meeting across town. She had waited in the front yard while the 3 of them went inside. She did not know what they did in there. She had not questioned it at the time because she had not yet known what she knew now. I asked her why she was at the airport. She told me she had known about my Portland trip because she had heard Ignatius and my mother discussing the schedule in detail about a week earlier, including the departure date and time. When she put together what she had discovered in recent weeks with the knowledge that today was the day they were planning to move into my house, she made a decision. She had purchased a ticket for the same flight that morning, not to go to Portland, but to get 45 uninterrupted minutes next to me before I was in the air and unreachable. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth pouch with a zipper. Inside was a plain white envelope. She held it out to me and said, "I found this 3 weeks ago. I did not know what to do with it until I found out what was happening today." I took the envelope but did not open it yet. I looked at her and asked why she was bringing this to me instead of confronting Ignatius herself. She told me that Ignatius checked her phone regularly, that he had access to her email on a shared tablet they used at home, and that she had not trusted any remote communication to be safe enough to use. The only way she could think of to reach me without him knowing was in person. The boarding announcement for our flight came over the speaker system. "Final boarding call. Neither of us moved. She looked at me and I looked at her, and we both understood without saying it that whatever was in that envelope mattered more than the plane. I opened the envelope at the gate with the boarding door already closed in front of us. There were 3 items inside. The first was a printed bank statement for a credit card account. The account was opened in the names of both of my parents. The outstanding balance on that account was $22,000. The itemized transactions included a long list of charges that I did not recognize, including 2 separate charges to the leasing company that held the contract on Ignatius's SUV, and a series of cash advance withdrawals over 8 months. The second item was a 2-page lease contract for a sport utility vehicle. The vehicle was a current model SUV registered to an address in Midwest City. The lease term was 36 months. The monthly payment was $640. At the bottom of the second page, there was a signature line. The signature on that line was written as my name. I read that contract twice. Slowly. Then I looked at the signature again. I know my own signature with precision because I had a specific way of writing the capital C that I developed intentionally when I first started signing client contracts. A small angular break in the curve that no one had ever commented on, but that was consistent across every document I had ever signed. The signature on that lease did not have that break. It was a close approximation, but it was not mine. Someone had signed my name on a financial contract without my knowledge and without my permission. That was not a family dispute. That was a crime. The third item in the envelope was a handwritten note from Delphine, 3 pages in careful small print, documenting what she had seen and heard over the past 3 months. She had overheard phone calls. She had seen text message threads on the shared tablet before she realized what she was reading. She had watched Ignatius and my mother plan the logistics of moving his belongings into my house in stages, starting with the trip today, with a second trip planned for the following weekend. The note included dates and direct quotes from conversations she had overheard. I put all 3 documents back in the envelope and held it on my lap. Delphine sat beside me and waited. She did not try to fill the silence. I had 2 clear choices in front of me at that moment, and I thought through both of them fully before I said anything. The first choice was to get on the next available flight to Portland, let the conference happen, and come home 4 days later to deal with whatever state my house was in. If I did that, Ignatius's belongings would be inside. My parents would have had 4 days to establish a presence there. And when I came home and objected, the response would be exactly what my mother had predicted it would be. She will just accept it. Everything is already here. The second choice was to not go to Portland at all, to turn around and go back to my house, and to end this today. The stakes of the first choice were not just my house. If I left and came home to a fait accompli, I would be communicating to everyone in that family, and to myself that the pattern could continue. That $2,000 in the middle of the night was acceptable. That $135,000 over 5 years was just what family did. That a signature on a lease contract I had never seen was something I would quietly absorb. The stakes of the second choice were different. Ignatius would push back. My parents would be present and they would try to manage the situation the way they always had, by reframing my objections as overreaction and waiting me out. There was a real possibility of a loud, chaotic confrontation inside my own home that would resolve nothing if I did not have a plan going in. But I was holding a credit card statement, a forged contract, and 3 pages of documented evidence. And sitting beside me was the one person who had taken a real risk to make sure I had all of it. I looked at Delphine and said, "I am not getting on that plane today. And I want you to stay with me not because I need backup, but because you took a risk to be here and you deserve to see what happens next." She said, "I was hoping you would say that." I stood up and walked toward the exit. Delphine followed. I dialed Marcus, my work assistant, as we walked through the terminal. Marcus had been with me for 4 years, through every difficult client situation and every logistical emergency my job had produced, and he understood how I operated. I gave him a brief and specific set of instructions. He listened without interrupting and said, "I understand, give me 60 minutes. I told him he had 45. Then I called my attorney. While I was driving back toward Edmond, my camera system was still running. I had the feed open on my phone propped on the center console so I could see it while Delphine drove. I had asked her to drive because I needed my hands free to make calls and take notes. At 10:47 in the morning, the camera showed my father carrying a large cardboard box through the front door. At 11:15, the camera showed my mother in the kitchen. and she had opened my refrigerator and was removing items from the shelves and setting them on the counter, replacing them with bags she had brought from their car. She was reorganizing my kitchen while I was on the road back from the airport. At 11:50, the camera showed Ignatius walking from room to room on the ground floor, opening doors, pausing to look inside each one. He stopped at the door to the primary bedroom and stood there for a moment. Then he turned back toward the hallway and said to my mother, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, "This room is big enough for 2 people." My mother said something I could not fully hear. Ignatius nodded and went back toward the front of the house. Delphine, who was watching the feed from the corner of her eye while she drove, said nothing. I said nothing. We both watched. At 12:30, Ignatius sat down at the desk in my home office, which was the small room I had set up with a dedicated monitor, a professional-grade ring light I used for client video calls, and a laptop I kept there specifically for work. He adjusted the ring light to face the desk chair. He set his phone on a small stand he had brought with him. He opened the laptop and logged into what I recognized as his live stream platform. He had a show scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon with a listed topic that Marcus had found when he pulled up the public channel page. Making smart moves with your money. Ignatius had 18,400 subscribers on that channel. He had built his brand over 2 years on the concept that he understood financial decision-making in a way that most people did not. He posted videos about budgeting, investing, avoiding debt, and building long-term wealth. His thumbnail images showed him in a clean buttoned-on shirt, looking directly at the camera, with phrases like, "the mistake that keeps you broke," and "why smart people stay ahead" overlaid in bold white text. He had not paid his rent for 2 months. He was setting up a ring light in my home office to broadcast to 18,000 people about financial wisdom, while my parents carried his belongings through my front door, using a key I had given for emergencies. Marcus called me back at 12:52. He confirmed that he had remote access to the work laptop in my home office. I had given him that access 2 years earlier so he could retrieve client files when I was in back-to-back meetings, and that he had verified the stream setup Ignatius was using. He explained what he could do if I needed it. I told him I would call him when I was in position. He said he would stay on standby. I told Delphine to park 2 blocks east of my house, on a residential side street that ran parallel to mine. We walked the rest of the way on foot, coming in from the south side where there was no camera coverage. I had a key to the side gate that led into the backyard, separate from the garage code and the front door key that my parents had. I opened that gate quietly, and we came in through the back. I entered through the garage door that connected to the rear hallway. I could hear the television on in the living room. I could hear my father's voice saying something about whether the cable box was already set up. I walked down the hallway toward the home office and stopped just outside the closed door. Through the door I could hear Ignatius adjusting something, the small sounds of a person arranging equipment. The clock on my phone said 2:47. I looked at Delphine, she looked at me. I knocked once and opened the door. Ignatius was sitting in my desk chair with the ring light on and his phone set up on the stand. He had his headphones around his neck. When he turned and saw me standing in the doorway, the expression on his face moved through 3 distinct phases in about 4 seconds. First surprise, then rapid calculation, then a careful settling into neutral that I had seen him use before in situations where he was trying to manage a reaction. He said, "You are not in Portland." I walked into the room. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the desk, at my laptop open to his streaming platform, at the ring light angled toward the chair, and then I looked back at him and said, "I decided to stay home. And I think your 3 o'clock is going to be interesting." My mother appeared in the doorway behind me. She had heard my voice in the hallway and come from the kitchen. She looked at me and stopped walking. Then my father appeared behind her. All 3 of them were in the room or the doorway, and all 3 of them were watching me with the particular stillness of people waiting to see how a situation was going to be managed. I pulled the secondary chair from against the wall to the side of the desk. I sat down and opened my laptop. I opened the file labeled "Family Transactions Do Not Share." The spreadsheet filled the screen. 47 rows of dates, amounts, stated reasons, and transfer methods going back 5 years. Ignatius looked at the screen, and I watched him recognize what it was. I said, "You have 18,400 subscribers. They came today to hear about smart financial decisions. I think a real case study is more useful than a general talk." Ignatius stood up from the chair. He said, "You cannot do this." I said, "I am in my house. I can do whatever I choose to do here." My mother said, "Callister, this is a family matter. We do not do this publicly." I looked at her and said, "You told Dad this morning in front of my front door on camera that once everything was here I would not make a scene and I would just accept it." I heard it. I have the recording. So let me be clear about something, I do not accept it. I have never accepted it. And today is the last day any of you will operate under the assumption that I will. Behind me, Delphine stepped into the doorway. Ignatius saw her. The careful, neutral expression he had been holding dropped immediately. He looked at her the way someone looks when they realize which piece of information has just crossed the room. He looked at the envelope she was holding. His jaw tightened. The stream auto-launched at 3 o'clock exactly as scheduled. The viewer counter in the corner of the screen started climbing. 200, 800, 2000. The thumbnail image loaded with Ignatius's face and the title "Making Smart Moves with Your Money." I adjusted the laptop so the camera built into the screen was facing me and pulled the external microphone that was already plugged in toward my side of the desk. I said into it, clearly and without any particular drama, "My name is Callister. This is my house and I am going to tell you a true story about money because true stories are more educational than general advice." I read from the spreadsheet. I did not editorialize. I read dates and amounts in order from the oldest entry to the most recent. I kept my voice level. I did not insert commentary between entries. I read the way I read a vendor payment schedule to a client, factually with precision. The viewer count went from 2,000 to 4,000 to 7,000 to 10,000 over the next 8 minutes. The comment section was moving faster than I could track. I did not look at it. I kept reading. At entry 23, which was a transfer of $3,400 made during a period when I had told my family I did not have available funds and had declined to attend a family vacation because of the cost, I heard my father make a sound in the doorway. I did not look up. I kept reading. Ignatius moved toward the desk. He put his hand on the laptop lid and said, "I am closing this." I said without looking at him, "You put your hand on my laptop in my house, I call the police right now for criminal trespass. Step back." He stepped back. I finished reading all 47 entries. The total I read last, slowly with a pause before and after it, was $135,000. The viewer count at that moment was 11,200. Then I said, "I also want to show you something that arrived today." Delphine walked to the desk. She placed the 3 documents from the envelope on the surface in front of the camera one at a time. She said, in a clear and steady voice, "My name is Delphine. I was engaged to Ignatius. I found these documents over the course of the past 3 weeks and I brought them here today because I believe the person whose name appears on them without her knowledge deserved to have them." She held up the credit card statement first. She read the account name and the balance, $22,000. She held up the lease contract second. She turned it to show the signature page directly to the camera. She said, "This contract is signed with Callister's name. Callister did not sign this contract." The comment section, which I caught in my peripheral vision, had stopped moving in rapid individual lines and had turned into a single scrolling blur. The viewer count had passed 11,000 and was climbing. My mother said from the doorway, "This is not what it looks like." Delphine set the contract down and looked at my mother directly and said, "Then what does it look like?" No one in the room answered. I looked at my mother, then at my father, then at Ignatius, and I said, "I want all 3 of you out of this house right now. Leave the key on the counter." Then I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I said it out loud in the room, with all 3 of them standing there, so that everyone present understood that the next voice they heard after mine was going to be a dispatcher. I gave the address. I described the situation. 3 individuals present in my home without my consent who had refused to leave when asked, and a signed legal document bearing my forged signature that I was prepared to provide to responding officers. The dispatcher told me officers would arrive within 20 minutes. I ended the call and looked at my family. My father walked to the counter and set the key down without a word. He walked out through the front door. My mother looked at me for a long moment and I held eye contact and said nothing, and then she followed him. Ignatius stood in the room for another few seconds. He looked at Delphine. She did not look back at him. He picked up his phone from the stand, left the ring light where it was and walked out. I closed the laptop. The stream ended. 2 officers arrived 17 minutes later. I provided a full statement, the forged lease contract, the credit card statement, and the recording from my security camera of my mother's statement at the front door that morning. One of the officers told me the forged signature on a lease contract constituted a serious matter that would be referred for investigation. They took Ignatius's contact information and told him he would need to make himself available for a formal interview within the week. He was not taken away in handcuffs that evening. That is not how the process works in most cases, but the investigation was opened. The documents were in official hands, and my family knew it. After the officers left, I sat at the kitchen table with Delphine for a while. I made coffee. We did not talk about Ignatius or about my parents or about what had happened in the hour before. We sat in my kitchen and I was aware, specifically and physically aware, that the kitchen was quiet. The television was off. There were no other voices in the house. The key was on the counter. The legal process that followed unfolded over the next several months. My attorney sent a formal demand letter within 2 weeks of the incident, citing the documented transactions totaling $135,000 as loans made under reasonable expectation of repayment and requesting repayment with applicable interest under Oklahoma statute. The letter also referenced the forged lease contract and the credit card account and noted that criminal referrals had already been made. Ignatius retained an attorney of his own. There were several rounds of communication between the two legal teams that I was not directly involved in. The process was not fast and it was not clean, but it was moving. And it was moving because I had 47 documented entries and a lease contract with a signature that was not mine. Delphine cooperated fully with investigators when they contacted her, which they did within 10 days of the initial report. Her written record of the conversations she had overheard was submitted as a witness statement. She answered every question she was asked. 3 days after the incident, my mother called me. I answered. She started to speak and I let her get 2 sentences in, and then I said, "I want to hear from you, but I need to say something first, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She said she would. I said, "There is a green wingback chair that was left to me by my grandmother and that you took from her house after her funeral. I want it returned to my house within the week. Second, I need a written apology. Not a phone call, not a conversation at the dinner table, a written statement that acknowledges specifically what was done and why it was wrong. Third, no one in this family enters my home again without a direct invitation from me issued at least 24 hours in advance. Those are not requests and they are not a starting point for a conversation. They are the conditions for us having any relationship going forward. There is nothing to negotiate about them." My mother was quiet, then she said she thought that was very cold. I said, "Those are my terms." I ended the calls. The chair arrived on my front porch on the 6th day. My father had placed it there sometime before 6 in the morning. He did not ring the doorbell. There was no note. I had already decided before the chair arrived that I was not going to measure my peace by whether they responded to my terms. I had said what I needed to say. I had put it in writing to my attorney as well, so there was a record of the conditions I had set. Whether they chose to meet those conditions or not was outside my control, and I had decided to stop organizing my life around things that were outside my control. I moved the chair back to the corner of the living room where it had always been in my house, the corner nearest the window that got morning light. I sat in it the next morning with my coffee before my first call of the day. That was it. That was the whole moment. I sat in my chair in my house and it was mine, and I was not waiting for anyone's permission to feel that way about it. Delphine and I spoke on the phone twice a week after that. She had moved out of the apartment she shared with Ignatius within 10 days of everything that happened, and was staying with a close friend in Norman. She was doing the practical, difficult work of untangling a shared life, and she was doing it with more clarity than I expected. She told me once, about 6 weeks in, that she had known for a while that something was wrong, but had not trusted herself enough to act on it. She said watching me act on it gave her something she did not have a word for. I told her I understood that feeling. 3 months after Portland, my house looks the same from the outside as it did before any of this happened. The blue front door, the small garden along the south side of the house that I planted the spring I moved in and have kept up every year since. The camera above the door that I will never take down. Inside, it is quieter than it used to be in a way that took some getting used to. I had spent so many years managing the noise of this family's needs and expectations that the absence of it felt strange for the first few weeks. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like a sound you have been hearing for so long you stopped noticing it, and then it stops, and the silence is louder than the sound ever was. I want to say something to you directly, because this is the part of the story that matters past my specific situation. If you have someone in your life who has been taking from you in amounts small enough to seem unremarkable, I want you to add them up. Not to fuel anger, just to know. Because there is a significant difference between choosing to give and slowly losing track of what you have handed over. One is generosity, the other is erosion. And erosion is only visible when you step back and look at the full picture. The people in my family did not think they were doing something unforgivable. They thought they were making practical decisions about resources within a family system, and that my discomfort was a small price for a practical outcome. My mother genuinely believed I would just accept it. She believed that because I had accepted smaller versions of the same thing for 5 years. The moment I stopped accepting was not the moment I confronted anyone. The moment I stopped accepting was the moment I sat down at a boarding gate and looked at a number I had been avoiding looking at, and decided that the number deserved to be seen. What you tolerate is what you teach people to expect, and what you document is what you can prove. Both of those things turned out to matter enormously. Role reversal: the final image. The last time I drove past my parents' house in Yukon, I did not stop. I was on my way to a client venue walkthrough and their street was part of the route. I passed the house and saw my father's truck in the driveway and the lights on inside, and I kept driving. Not out of anger. I am not angry anymore. I drove past because I had somewhere to be and getting there did not require stopping. That is what I wanted for myself when I was standing at that boarding gate watching my brother walk through my front door. Not revenge, not a scene, not a public humiliation. I wanted to go somewhere, and I wanted to go there without looking back. 3 months later, that is what I have. You cannot build your own life on foundations that other people are constantly borrowing from. At some point, you have to decide the foundation is yours, and then you have to act like it is. L letwani dd I keruji letwani cd. I hand d stroke letwani d9ng. See you letwani d1 I bye. If this story made you feel something, I want to know about it. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had a family member, a friend, or anyone close to you take something from you and expect you to stay silent about it? How did you handle it, or how do you wish you had handled it? I read every comment and I want to hear from you. If you watched this all the way through and it meant something to you, please like this video. It takes 1 second and it tells me that this kind of honest, unfiltered storytelling is worth continuing. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that button and turn on notifications, because there are more stories coming, and they are just as real as this one. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it. Not to shock them, but because sometimes people need to see someone else draw a line before they can imagine drawing one of their own. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself, set your terms, and do not apologize for either one.